Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me loud and clear? Great. Well, it's been a pretty extraordinary week in British politics, and some might say pretty extraordinary day in British politics. The day's the day we learn that there will be surveillance cameras, not just in our big cities, but literally in every single village. The surveillance state is getting very, very close indeed. And that, of course, in the same week that we learn that the 800-year right to trial by jury is to be abolished in the majority of cases. And by the way, the argument that magistrates deal with many of the minor cases, well, think about it, 3 magistrates actually form a mini jury of their own. And of course, despite not being in the manifesto, the government want to introduce digital ID.
Imagine being so terrified of your own electorate that you decide the best strategy is to simply not let them vote. Sounds like something from a dodgy Netflix political thriller, doesn't it? Well, buckle up, because that's essentially what's happening right now in Britain. Keir Starmer's Labour government has just invited 63 councils to postpone next year's local elections, potentially robbing over 10 million people of their democratic say. And the political world has absolutely lost its mind over it. Quick favor, if you're finding this as wild as I am, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, takes 2 seconds, and honestly means everything to us. Cheers if you did. Right, let's get stuck into this democratic disaster. So here's what's happened. Labour has basically sent out invitations to dozens of councils across England saying, fancy postponing your elections then? And we're not talking about a few weeks delay. We're talking about May's local elections, the ones that everyone was looking forward to as a proper referendum on Starmer's increasingly shaky leadership. The elections that would show us exactly what the British public thinks about this government. Those elections. Gone. Potentially. Now, the government's official line is that this is all about local government reorganization. They are merging councils, creating unitary authorities, and apparently running elections at the same time will be terribly inconvenient. You know, like how it's inconvenient to go to the dentist, but you still bloody well do it because it's important. But here's where it gets properly suspicious. Of the 63 councils being invited to postpone, half are run by Labour, either directly or in coalition. What are the chances, eh? Let me paint you a picture of what this actually means on the ground. In some areas, these elections are being postponed for a second consecutive year. That means councillors could go 7 years, 7 actual years, without facing voters. Think about that. 7 years ago, Brexit hadn't even happened yet. Theresa May was Prime Minister. We were all younger, more innocent souls who hadn't lived through a pandemic or multiple cost of living crises. And some councillors will have spent that entire time in office without once having to ask the public if they are doing a good job. Nigel Farage, never one to mince words, likened the move to the actions of a dictator. His exact words were, "Only a banana republic bans elections. That's what we have under Starmer." Now, you might think Farage is being his usual bombastic self, but here's the thing. He's got a point. When governments start cancelling elections because they're worried about losing them, you cross a line from democratic governance into something rather more unsavory. Reform UK, Farage's party, doesn't currently hold any of these affected councils. But here's why this matters so much to them. They were absolutely banking on making serious gains in May. The polls have been showing reform eating into Labour's vote, particularly in those traditional working-class heartlands that Labour thought were nailed down forever. These May elections were supposed to be reform's big moment to prove they're not just a flash in the pan, that they can actually win seats and govern locally. And now, that opportunity might just vanish into thin air. Lee Anderson, the Reform MP who switched from Conservatives, said Starmer was frit. For those not versed in proper Northern English, that means frightened, scared, running away with his tail between his legs. And honestly, it's hard to argue with that assessment when you're literally cancelling elections. But let's talk about the Conservative response, because it's been absolutely scathing. Sir James Cleverly, the Tory election spokesman, accused Labour of running scared of the voters. He said they thought they could completely overhaul local government and stack the deck in their favour, but they got it wrong. And you know what? When the Conservatives are calling you out for being anti-democratic, you know you've properly messed up. That's like being called unhealthy by someone eating a deep-fried Mars bar. Robert Jenrick, the Conservative Justice spokesman, drew a fascinating comparison. He pointed out that even during the pandemic, elections weren't cancelled for a second year running. Let that sink in. During COVID, when we were all locked in our houses, when people couldn't visit dying relatives, when the entire country was essentially shut down, we still managed to hold elections. But now, in 2025, with no pandemic, no national emergency, nothing except political inconvenience, we're canceling them? The optics are absolutely terrible. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Word on the street, or rather in Westminster, is that allies of Sir Keir are genuinely terrified he could face a leadership coup within days of the May elections if the results are as catastrophic as the polls suggest. So cancelling those elections isn't just about local government reorganization. It's about survival. It's about making sure Keir Starmer is still Prime Minister come June. There's even talk that Starmer was planning to schedule the King's speech for the week after the poll, hoping that potential rivals wouldn't risk embarrassing His Majesty by moving against him during such an important constitutional moment. That's some proper Game of Thrones level strategic thinking right there. Use a monarch as a human shield against your own party. Brilliant, in a deeply cynical sort of way. Now, let's look at the numbers properly, because they tell quite the story. 63 councils in total are being invited to postpone. 31 or 32 of those are run by Labour. 11 are Conservative. 13 are Liberal Democrat. The rest are various other arrangements. But here's the crucial bit. Labour holds significantly more of these councils than any other party. So when they cancel elections, they're disproportionately protecting their own seats. It's like a football manager being allowed to postpone matches when his team's injury list is looking dodgy. The District Council's network chairman, Richard Wright, said the normal four-year election cycle should be broken only in the most exceptional circumstances. He warned this has a potential to undermine faith in our cherished local democracy, and is absolutely right. Democracy isn't just about the big general elections every few years. It's about constant accountability. It's about knowing that if your local council is doing a rubbish job collecting the bins or maintaining the roads, you can boot them out at the next election. Take that away, and you fundamentally change the relationship between the governed and those who govern. Local government Minister Alison Govan tried to defend the decision in Parliament. She told MPs that many councils across the country, of all political stripes, had expressed concerns about managing elections while undergoing massive reorganization. She said ministers were minded to cancel elections wherever local authorities said it might put pressure on time and resources. But here's the problem with that logic. Running elections always puts pressure on time and resources. That's not a bug, it's a feature. Democracy is supposed to be slightly inconvenient. It's supposed to force politicians to pause what they are doing and ask the people if they approve. Govan did say that if a council says they have no reason to delay their elections, there will be no delay. Which sound reasonable until you realize this puts enormous pressure on councils. Imagine being a Labour-run council where the polling looks terrible. Are you really going to volunteer to hold an election where you'll probably get hammered? Or are you going to discover that actually, yes, this reorganization is terribly time-consuming and we should probably postpone? The Conservative local government spokesman, Paul Holmes, absolutely let rip in the Commons. He asked what the government has against democracy and then delivered this absolute gem. While many people gather around their screens to watch movies like How the Grinch Stole Christmas, we're sitting here discussing how Labour is trying to steal the elections. That's a kind of seasonal political burn that'll warm you better than any Christmas fire. Holmes pointed out that earlier this month, Labour cancelled mayoral elections because they were worried they wouldn't win them. Now they are doing the same with local elections, pausing the democratic process to serve their own political interests. It's becoming a pattern, isn't it? When things look dicey politically, just postpone the vote. Easy. Even Sir Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader, got involved. He called it yet another Labour and Conservative stitch-up to deny people their votes in May. Which is interesting because it suggests this isn't just Labour acting alone. There might be some backroom conversations happening between the parties about which elections to postpone where. The Lib Dems, who stand to gain quite a bit in local elections given their recent by-election successes, are understandably miffed about potentially losing that opportunity. The Electoral Commission itself has weighed in on this mess. They warn that elections shouldn't be postponed for more than 12 months. But in places like Essex, they are being postponed for a second consecutive year, flying directly in the face of that guidance. When even the body responsible for overseeing elections is telling you've gone too far, that's a pretty good sign you've gone too far. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture here, because this doesn't exist in isolation. This is the same government that proposed scrapping jury trial for many offences, supposedly to deal with court backlogs. It's the same government floating the idea of digital ID cards. Critics have branded these proposals authoritarian, and when you add cancelling elections to the list, you can see why they might have a point. There's a pattern emerging of a government that seems uncomfortable with traditional checks and balances, with a messy inconvenience of democracy. The political timing of all this is absolutely crucial. We're coming up to the point in this parliament when normally a government would be settling in, implementing its agenda with confidence. But instead, Starmer's approval ratings are in the toilet. Labour's poll numbers are dropping. Reform is surging. The Conservatives are recovering from their historical defeat. May's local elections were supposed to give us the first proper read on how the country feels about this government. Now, we might not get that read at all. And that's ultimately why this matters so much. It's not just about procedural fairness or constitutional niceties. It's about the fact that in a healthy democracy, governments need regular reality checks. They need to be told, clearly and unambiguously, what the public thinks of them. Local elections do that. They are the political equivalent of a progress report. And if you start cancelling progress reports because you're worried about the grades, well, you're not really interested in accountability anymore. Are you? The defense that this is all about local government reorganization would be more convincing if Labour hadn't spent months prior to this banging on about democratic renewal and bringing power back to communities. You can't campaign on giving people more say in how they are governed and then cancel elections because they are inconvenient. Well, you can, but don't expect people not to notice the hypocrisy.